It's 7:02 West African time. You're watching the Rise News from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. This is Daybreak with me, Frank Omalape. If you're just waking up, let's remind you of our top stories this morning. Pope Francis lies in an estate in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome for the last day on Friday ahead of the funeral. Today, more than 100 foreign delegations, including heads of state and royalty, have arrived Rome ahead of the funeral. There was also a last chance for huge crowds of mourners filing past the Pope's coffin to pay their respect. There's been an extra surge of people from all over the world braving the long hours to enter the Basilica. Report shows more than 150,000 people have so far viewed his body. Correspondents said it underscores the importance of the moment. In the meantime, U.S. President Donald Trump, accompanied by First Lady Melania Trump, touched down in Rome's Leonardo da Vinci Airport, making his first foreign trip since returning to power, as the Vatican makes its final preparations ahead of Pope Francis' funeral after 250,000 mourners passed through St. Peter's Basilica to view his open coffin. The pontiff will be laid to rest at 10 a.m. today in St. Peter's Square, following 3 days of public viewing since his death at age 88 on Monday. In line with his wishes, Francis will be buried in a simple wooden coffin, abandoning the traditional triple casket arrangement. More than 250,000 people, however, have flocked to St. Peter's Basilica since Wednesday, with the Vatican keeping its doors open overnight to manage the surging crowds. Trump's administration drew the pontiffs for its mass deportation of migrants, but the president arrived with his wife Melania to pay tribute to a good man who loved the world. Trump will face dozens of foreign leaders keen to bend his ear over a trade war he unleashed, among other subjects. In the meantime, French President Emmanuel Macron was among the last to bow before the coffin, with the overall crowd exceeding the estimated 195,000 who came to see Francis' predecessor Benedict XVI after his death in 2022. Other presidents, including President of Lebanon Joseph Aoun, his Brazilian counterpart Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda, and the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán also paid their respect to Pope Francis on his last day of his line in state. Around 50 heads of state and 10 monarchs, including Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, are expected at the Saturday's outdoor ceremony in St. Peter's Square. On Friday, an emergency alert was sent out to phones in Rome and the Vatican to inform visitors that access to the church would end at 5 p.m. local time. The Pope's coffin was then sealed in a special ceremony led by Cardinal Kevin Farrell. Security around the Vatican has been tightened, with the flying restrictions, rooftop snipers and fighter jets on standby. And following his death on Monday, aged 88, Pope Francis will be laid to rest today in Rome, while his funeral is expected to draw dignitaries from across the world, as well as tens of thousands of faithful mourners. Late Friday, the Pope's coffin was sealed after lying in state in an open wooded coffin in St. Peter's Basilica since Wednesday morning, as some 150,000 people visited the Pope's body to pay their last respect. Well, to take us through what is expected to happen today and what may come next for the Catholic Church is Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya. It just me live from St. Peter's Square. Thank you so much, Adefemi. It's good to see you.
So good to see you. So good to hear your voice as well.
Great.
Good morning.
Great. Good morning. Well, let's get right in immediately. When does the funeral begin, and what can we expect from the service this morning?
Okay, so funeral mass is expected to start at 10 a.m. local time. We are actually an hour ahead of you in Nigeria and on the same time with most of mainland Europe. So 10 a.m. for us here will be 9 a.m. in Nigeria, for example. And it is known that the leader of the funeral mass today will be Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, who is the chief of cardinals, essentially the most senior cardinal at the cathedral, at the basilica. And so he will be leading today's service, and that will be taking place essentially in large parts outside. We do know that for the course of this week, hundreds of thousands of people have poured into St. Peter's Square and the areas in order for them to be close to this hub for the Catholic faithful, and definitely for them to be able to pay their last respects, especially over the course of the last few days. We do know that his coffin was of course sealed yesterday evening, but that hasn't stopped the mass influx of people coming into the area, coming in to the cathedral grounds in order and in anticipation for this funeral service. So as I said, the mass will begin at 10 a.m. and it will be largely taking place outside. There are people who have slept on the cobbled streets of this area overnight so that they could be close by, so that they could really feel the spirit of the funeral mass that is supposed to be taking place in some a lot of anticipation, a lot of security presence, a whole lot of cardinals, of Catholic faithfuls, lots of people in their religious dress, all making their way towards the grounds of St. Peter's Square. And so naturally, when we are looking at the funeral rites itself, it will take place across the day. His body remains within the St. Peter's Square grounds, and then over the course of the day it will make its way through certain parts of Rome before, of course, making its way and arriving at the final resting place where his coffin will be buried. So there's quite from today, but it's still a little too early to tell what the procession will look like. But of course, just judged by the amount of people walking towards St. Peter's Square, you can expect that there's going to be a huge crowd. And if we cast our minds back to the funeral of the former Pope from Francis, his funeral attendance around 50,000, and as it stands now, it's likely that we are going to expect something upwards of that because of so many people who have come into Rome, come into Vatican City in anticipation for this funeral. So we are looking forward to seeing what the procession will be like. As I said, his body will, over the course of the day, be transported from St. Peter's Square throughout certain parts of Rome before making its way to its final resting place. So there's going to be a lot of movement you can anticipate.
All right, great. Talk to us about what you're seeing on ground, because I understand his funeral and final rite are a breakaway from tradition. Is that intentional?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we're looking at the legacy of Pope Francis, he spoke at length about being really the people's Pope, not wanting there to be a huge difference between him as institution, the church, and the people that he is sworn to lead. And so what we're seeing that really is that type of request manifested in the funeral processions. He is a person who did not want an overly decorated coffin, did not want his body to be elevated and draped in, unnecessary decorations. But while his issues and his requests have definitely been respected, this is definitely not going to be a low-key ceremony. You can expect, just from the sheer attendance, that this is going to be quite a historic event. That being said, if we look at his coffin, for example, it is just simple wood lined with zinc, something that he made clear that he wanted. Usually when popes die, when they are buried, when they are put in their caskets, the caskets are far more elaborate, but he talked about not wanting that. His coffin, when it is finally sealed, which we know took place around 5 p.m. on Friday, when it does actually make its way to its resting place and is ready to be buried, all it has on its inscription is his name, Franciscus, in the full Latin version of his name. So just an indication of someone who did not want the pomp and circumstance. But as you can imagine, this being the leader of the Catholic Church, leader of millions of Catholics all over the world, that this is not going to be a very simple affair. This is still going to be elaborate in terms of funerals, but for him, still in respect to what he wished, which was a very low-key and respectful ceremony.
You mentioned earlier, Adefemi, you mentioned earlier that key dignitaries from across the world are expected there. But which world leaders and members of royalty are expected to attend the funeral today, specifically?
So firstly, we do know that, of course, Donald Trump has already arrived in Rome and is making his way to the grounds of St. Peter's Square. He arrived alongside the US First Lady, Melania. So both of them are already in Italy. And we do know that when we're looking at different world leaders, we can also expect who is referred to as the humanitarian Pope, the leader of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, is also on the ground. In terms of other world leaders, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, also is around. He actually was among the last people to be able to enter the Basilica and see Pope Francis still lying in state in his coffin before it was sealed yesterday evening. He and his wife, Brigitte, were both able to enter the church and see the open casket before it was sealed. In addition to that, we do know that there is a strong delegation from Argentina, which is where Pope Francis was originally from, led by, of course, the Prime Minister and the President of Argentina coming into the ground. Lots of European leaders. We do know that the leader of Poland is also on ground, and definitely from Mexico, the president herself, Sheinbaum, will not be attending, but she will be represented. And we do know that when we're looking at the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer has already arrived. He was welcomed by Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, when he arrived on Friday, and he also, in terms of representing the United Kingdom, will be joined by Prince William, who is representing his father, King Charles. So there is a lot of international presence here, and that also includes African leaderships and also Nigerian. We do know that Nigeria has sent a delegation to the Vatican, to Rome, for this funeral. We have seen pictures of the Senate President Godswill Akpabio also on the grounds of St. Peter's Square, within the church itself too, which is just a testament to the reach of this Pope. In addition to that, earlier this week, we do know that the 2023 presidential aspirant for the Labour Party, Peter Obi, also was able to enter the Basilica and see Pope Francis's body while he was lying in state. So there is still quite an international presence, and that does clearly include Nigeria also.
Great, well said. Of course, Nigeria is represented. It's a good thing. But tell us about the security measures in place. What is the atmosphere like? Because we hear the security situation is quite tight over there.
Absolutely. Security is extremely tight. There are a lot of people. So when we're looking at, first and foremost, the barricades, that stretches out across this entire area. Crowd control is definitely something that has been very important to the Italian authorities, to the Vatican authorities, in making sure that there is a safe passage of people. Hundreds of thousands, some 150,000 people are expected and have been descending on this area. So making sure that the crowd is adequately managed without any cause for casualty or injury is something that's very important to the authorities. So we are seeing barricades, we are seeing a lot of police presence, a lot of road closures. Our hotel is actually not far from here. We're about a 15-minute walk, but even then it was still quite taxing for us to reach our different positions, to be able to speak and to see where we needed to be, because there are so many people here and security is quite tight. Even if people are using vehicles to get as close as possible, they're going to have to come down and walk. So there is a lot of police presence just over my shoulder. You can see that there are some different convoys. You can obviously see the church in the background, and lots of people still gathering. We still have just under 2 hours before the actual church services is expected to start, before funeral mass is expected to start. You can see lots of people in their high visible jackets. You can see some cardinals and Catholics crossing the street there. That is actually where we will be passing into post this conversation, actually, just so we can get closer into the funeral grounds without really disturbing. To my left here, there is a tunnel which is actually obstructed from view, but that's where a lot of people are being directed so they can get to the front of St. Paul's Church. So it is a lot of people still yet to come, and you can imagine that over the course body does move from the grounds of the square towards its resting place, it's going to encounter a lot of people who be out on the streets, definitely giving their well wishes. I know that the authorities here do want a very clean and clear event. They do not want any cause for arrest, any cause for injury, and for now, so far so good. When we're looking at the crowd management, it does seem as though as many people as there are here, there has been a very easy way to get around. Lots of people who are definitely in somber moods, but definitely mellow. A lot of the people who are very friendly, they've all greeting each other, people who know each other, people who do not. Even with us here, clearly as the foreigners we are, we've definitely been met by a lot of hospitality, a lot of kindness. So for a moment like this, it is good to see the world coming together, and you can imagine that there is anticipation for a smooth, safe and peaceful funeral mass today.
Well, indeed, we expect that. But let's talk about, before I let you go, Adefemi, let's talk about the expectation for the next Pope. What happened next? Because I do know now, by now, Vatican will be getting ready, maybe, to start the process of appointing a new Pope. When can the world really expect a new Pope to emerge?
Well, it's best and worst case scenario here, because this is the situation that takes a lot of time and it's very, very secretive. So what we have now is a process of conclave. Once the funeral ends, then the actual formal process of selecting the new Pope begins. And this is going to be over a course of a series of rounds of voting, where you have the most senior cardinals voting for who they think should lead who should be the next Catholic Church following the death of Pope Francis. Now, this is going to be very interesting because, as I said, this entire process happens behind closed doors. So as it stands now, what we have is a lot. And if we cast our minds back some 12 years, when Pope Francis was selected, there was a running joke that the cardinals had to go to the ends of the earth to find him. And so it will be interesting to see whether or not the next Pope will emerge from a different part of the world. We do know, of course, Pope Francis was the first Pope from the global south, in a lot of people's lifetimes. So it'll be interesting to see who will step into his shoes next. This is a process that can take days, can take weeks, but may even take months because of the secretive nature of this, because there are different cardinals who may have candidates who they want to emerge. This is, in as much as this is a religious and of course a dated practice, there's a lot of politics that goes into these types of decision making, and that has a bearing over the time it will take before the world finds out who the next Pope is. When we're looking at the candidates, there are some candidates from Italy, some Italian cardinals whose names have been thrown into the ring, but when you're looking at social media, it does seem as though a cardinal from the Philippines is the quote-unquote forerunner. But as I said, that is just nonsense fodder at this point, because no one really knows what names are in the running, who would be selected. But it is interesting to see that there is a lot of rambling on social media behind perhaps the next Pope coming from the Philippines, because there is a huge, one of the world's biggest Catholic populations is found in the Philippines. And so we will just have to wait and see. Earlier this week, Pope Francis's death, look at the prospect of perhaps the next Pope being black, being an African. That being said, there were two names that were thrown around. One was a cardinal from Ghana, Cardinal Sarah, and then the other from Guinea, two West Africans, two black men. So it would be interesting if when we find out who the next from too much.
Well, I guess
many people did not want him to come to the city at that time because they felt it was too dangerous, and he steadfast said that he was going and was happy to go alone. And obviously
well, I guess Adefemi Akinsoye, I guess we lost connection with you there, but I think you've said a lot, and you're going to have a busy day ahead. We expect to hear from you more on this particular event in the day later in the day. Thank you so much. International correspondent Adefemi Akisonya, live for us from Peter Square there. Thank you so much.